Hey, Texas Study students. This is Coach Science, welcoming you back to another one of our video lessons. Today's video lesson is Life in Spanish Texas, Chapter 7.1 and 7.2. Now, make sure that you're paying attention throughout the whole video lesson and make sure that you're listening so you can fill in the worksheet as you go along. Today we're going to talk about how the New World looked in the year 1700. Now, by the year 1700, Spain and France each controlled about the same amount of territory in the New World. Now, if you look at this map here, we can see where in orange, this is what Spain controlled, and in green, this is what France controlled, or what they called New France. Now, if you remember, Sieur de La Salle traveled up the Mississippi, and this is the land that he discovered for his king, King Louis XIV. All this right here, up into present-day Canada. Now, Spain had looked for and discovered all this in orange, right? As you can see, that's kind of about the same, almost the same size, both of them, right? Now, you're probably thinking, what about these orange ones right here, these reddish orange? Now, that is the 13 colonies, the 13 English colonies. We'll be discussing those later throughout the year, and next year, you'll be talking about those in American history. Now we're going to talk about how Spain colonized the New World. Now, Spain established missions, which we've talked about quite a bit recently, the last few days and the last week. Now, remember, missions were what? Yeah, exactly. Missions where priests and friars lived. And with the missions, what the civil settlements, what they would do, not the civil settlements, the Presidios, right here, the Presidios, they were the what? The forts. They were the forts that were created to protect the missions, right? Now, also with that came the civil settlements, right? The civil settlements was or Pueblos, as it's known, are where the normal people, everyday people, people who weren't a part of the church or soldiers would live. Now, at every mission, presidio, or civil settlement, you would see this old Spanish flag representing that, hey, this is Spain colonizing this area and it is no one else's. Now, missions, what the missions did, what their main purpose was to convert the native Texans to Catholicism, right? Now, by doing that, they would teach them to be loyal subjects of the Spanish crown. Here we can see these friars blessing and maybe baptizing the natives and their children, right? Now, with that, they would baptize them and bless them and try to convert them to Catholicism. Now, after that, they would teach them to be loyal subjects to the Spanish crown, to the Spanish flag, so that they could serve for the King of Spain and help out and build these friars and these missions. Now, by the end of the 1700s, there were 26 established missions all throughout Texas. Now, life in the missions had a routine. Days began with morning prayer. As we can see here, here's a depiction of what it looked like a Spanish mission, right? Now, they would have the prayer room, and this is where the chapel was. This is where you can see the cross there, the chapel. This is where they would begin their morning prayers. Now, after they would do prayers, they would have a 1-hour lesson on Catholicism, right? They would slowly learn. They would teach them every day at least 1 hour before they did that. Now, they would have breakfast right here in the kitchen. You can see it there. They had breakfast. Now, after they would have breakfast, the natives would work all day. And they would work in 3 different areas. Here in this depiction right here, in number 3, as you can see the number, they would work there in the shops. That's one of the areas that they would work in. They were doing any inside work, anything that had to do with maintenance in here, this is where it would start. The other area that they would work was out here in the fields. They were tending to the farming, right? And making sure everything was good there. Another area would be working at was the irrigation area, making sure that the irrigation system was good and clean and everything was taken care of there. So they worked all day. Now, after dinner, they would end with more prayers and lessons back in the chapel to wrap up the long day of working. Now, the women would usually be in here working in the kitchen and any cleaning up throughout the area here inside the mission. And the children would either be inside the chapel or at school all day. Now, although in this depiction we can see out here that the natives were outside, most Texans natives would actually live inside the mission. Now, there was a dark side to living in the missions, the life of the missions. Now, priests would often physically punish uncooperative natives. I mean, that means that if a native did not listen or would not pray a certain prayer, they would get after him and hurt him physically if they were uncooperative or did not listen to what they want to say. Now, at the same time, very few natives actually converted to Catholicism. Many natives actually just came to the mission for food and shelter because it was a lot safer than being out in the open and possibly being killed. Now, most natives stayed at the mission for only a few months because of the demanding lifestyle that this was. They couldn't handle all the things that they had to do, so they decided that after a few months, they said, you know what, we're out of here, we'd rather go back out to the wilderness, and they would leave. Now let's go ahead and switch over to the Presidios. Now the Presidios' main purpose was to protect Spanish colonists from native attacks. Now if you can remember, a lot of the tribes in the areas of Texas were warlike, so they were gonna attack if anybody that they did not recognize or did not like or saw them taking over their land, they're gonna attack. So that's why they had presidios like this one you see in this picture with tall lookout towers so they can see when things like this were going to happen or attacks were on their way. Now remember, presidios were always next to missions so they could protect the mission. Now another note of the presidios, the presidio was used for soldiers to bring back natives who would run away from the mission. Now, if you remember from earlier, soldiers would go after them, right? Now, going back to earlier, these natives would be there for 3, maybe 4 months, and after that they said, no, we're out of here, right? So these soldiers, what they would do is they would go look for the runaways. Now, do you guys actually think that when they came back, they were going to be treated with open arms? Absolutely not. They were punished severely, hurt severely for running away from the mission. So this did not make the missions very popular for the natives. Now, once missions and presidios were set up, you would count on people moving into that area. And this is where our civil settlements or our pueblos come in. Now, colonists from Spain were brought in for colonies to grow and survive. Now, the first group of colonists to establish a civil settlement were the Canary Islanders, Canary, Canary Islanders, who settled in San Antonio in 1730. Now, before they got there, before the civil settlement established, the Pueblo of San Antonio was established, the mission San Antonio de Valero and the Presidio San Antonio de Bejar was already established. So they were already there. The friars, the priests, and soldiers were already there. But the civil settlement was established by the Canary Islanders in 1730. Here in this map, we see a picture of exactly where the Canary Islanders and where the place was where the San Antonio de Valero and San Antonio de Bejar was actually set up. Now, some colonists lived on ranches where they would raise cattle, horses, and hogs to provide the food needed to survive. Now, one of the reasons why ranches were so popular was that raising and protecting cattle was easier than farming. It was easier than going out there having to move the dirt of the whole field, put a little seed, and wait time. So they did this. They would ranch. They would take care of these cattle, the hogs, the horses, and this would also provide food for them to survive. Now, vaqueros would also round up and take care of these cattle. They would put them all together, they would herd them together, and they would take care of them for later sale and then later food for them to eat. Now, life in the Spanish towns was led by the alcalde. He kept the order while the ayuntamiento actually carried out the Spanish king's orders, right? Now, if we can remember from the previous lesson or the couple previous lessons ago, the alcalde was the what, guys? That's right. He was the mayor, he was the sheriff, and the judge. He was the most responsible man in the city. He had held the most responsibility. He had 3 jobs all put in one. Now, one of the things that they would do to pass the time or to get away from this hardship of living in these civil settlements and in these new lands is they would have town dances, as you can see in this picture here. Now, town dances were used to meet neighbors, to meet new people, to promote friendships with each other, and to lift up settler spirits and to help them escape the hardships of moving to a new continent, right? They're moving to a new land, a new continent, a new area. They're moving away from their family, their friends, coming to a new place of land and opportunity, yes, but it is hard on them because they have to start from fresh, start from new. So they would have these town dances, like you can see here, to lift their spirits. Now, in this time, in the late 1700s, there was 3,500 colonists in Texas. Now, you're probably thinking, in all of Texas, there was only 3,500 people? Yep, that's right. There wasn't very many people. There wasn't. Compared to how many people there are now, it seems like a very little amount. Now, back then in the 1700s, San Antonio, which we see here, had 2,000. La Bahia, which is in this area right here, formerly known as La Bahia, now it's known as Goliad, right there, had about 1,000. And Nacogdoches, which is in that star, had 1,500. That made up the main population areas of Texas in the 1700s. The next thing we're going to talk about is the Spanish and how the effect they had on the environment. Now, when the Spanish came over, they're not just going to live on the open land. No, they needed to build homes. They needed to build things that they were going to be able to sustain life and be in, right? So with that, the Spanish built colonial homes from timber, as you can see right here, and rocks, as you can see in this picture right here. Now, the furniture that they used was made from any natural resource in the area that they could use. So if they could make a chair out of a piece of wood or a rock or anything, they would use that. The home furniture was made from the natural resources within the area that they lived in and the area that they possessed. Now, because the Spanish lived in this area, using the environment, there were positive and negative effects, as you can see here in this picture. Now, the positive effects was that the Spanish were provided with shelter and necessities for them to survive. Now, the negative effect was that the natural resources were lost. Now, if you can look in this picture, this is exactly what happens when you have to use the environment to survive. The Spanish would need wood to build homes and timber, right? They would cut down trees. So they needed the positive ones to be able to provide shelter and necessities, but the negative was that they had to cut down the forest for their survival. Not only did the Spanish have a great influence on the natural resources, they had a great influence on how they named things. A lot of Spanish names are still used to this day. For example, the rivers, right, or the ríos. The Rio Grande, which is large river, the Nueces, the Colorado, and the Brazos River, which we've already studied and you've done a map on. The city names, which are Amarillo, or the Yellow City, El Paso, Laredo, and Hidalgo. And even some of the street names around here in Sharyland, which are San Pedro, Los Indios, and Los Milagros. Now, Spanish influence is still felt throughout our lives today. Now, one of the big ones is Catholicism. Catholicism is spread out throughout the Rio Grande Valley, and it is huge, right? One of the biggest churches here in the Rio Grande Valley is the Basilica de San Juan, right? Another thing is our food. Here we have tortillas and tamales, and I can go on and on. Menudo, tacos, you name it, right? Another one of the things is arts. We have Ramon Ayala, and we have corridos and Tejano music. Those are some of the things that Spanish influence still is deeply rooted throughout us in our culture. This wraps up our video lesson of Life in Spanish, Texas, chapter 7.1 through 7.2. This is Coach Science, signing out.